Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your patience. We had a couple of technical challenges here this morning, and I think we're up and ready to go here. We might have some challenges as we work through, but hold on, we will get through this for sure this morning. So welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions, as always, please, during the presentation, type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each one. This webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording. So Lionel, go ahead.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for attending. I'd like to welcome you to I guess it's the August 13th edition of Crop Talk. We're having a couple problems getting my screen up, so we're going to start right away with, at first with John, but just a little bit of a start off before we get going. Took a week off to do some surveying and doing a lot of walking in fields, so there's been a few questions that have come up over the last little while here, and so we'll deal with those today. But a lot of questions from producers regarding canola and what they should be looking for when they're out scouting and what they're seeing in the fields now. So I guess with that, I thought it'd be a good idea to get John to come on and maybe give us maybe a little bit of an update on what he's been seeing, what some of the forecasts are showing, and just what we should be checking for when we're out there scouting our canola fields, and mainly for Bertha and Diamondback, but there's been a few other things that have shown up as well. So I guess with that, I'm going to let John, he's got the screen now, so I'll just let John take over and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. And so you mentioned things people should be looking for in canola right now. Probably top of the list is Bertha armyworm, especially if you're in the western part of the province. Maybe secondarily, a diamondback moth. There's been a bit of spraying for that, but mainly in the eastern region and Interlake for diamondback. Bertha, the bigger population seem to be in the western part of the province. So for western Manitoba, definitely Bertha armyworm should be probably top of your list as far as the insects go. Now, one of the things that makes it really tricky when we're scouting for Bertha armyworm is they can have these various color forms to them. So the picture on your left shows the black form, which when we get high levels is sometimes one of the dominant color forms. However, they can also have a green color form, a brown color form, uh, a form that's kind of almost in between a brown and a green, and then the black color form. So they've got these various color forms to them. Usually you will see this light colored kind of yellowish line along the side of the body. Black form, you'll see a couple white stripes down the back. So again, they can be a little bit tricky with the ID part just because you do have these different color morphs. And I should also mention, you will see Bertha armyworm on other crops other than canola. Um, we were setting up traps yesterday in a cornfield. Now, they won't feed on corn, but there was a lot of lamb's quarters in patches in this field, and there was a lot of Bertha armyworm on the lamb's quarters. There's certain weeds they really like, lamb's quarters being one of their favorites. You'll also find Bertha armyworm on things like quinoa, which they really like, hemp. Occasionally you will find some in alfalfa, potatoes, some of the other host plants for them, but not usually the same levels you see in canola. As far as field crops, canola is one of their favorites. So monitoring techniques. Um, Canola, but one of the things for Bertha that is really important to realize is they are primarily a nocturnal moth, meaning they hide during the day, they come out at night and feed. Now, there are exceptions. Yesterday was a cool, cloudy day, and we were seeing them up on the lamb's quarters plants, but we were seeing them during the day, but many more of them would be on the ground than would be on the plants during the day, especially on a hotter day. Most will be hiding. So you really can't effectively use a sweep net to monitor Bertha armyworm. The way you do it is you mark out an area on the ground. What I like to use, I've created a three-sided 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter frame that I will slide uh, into the canola canopy, put it on the ground, and basically just count everything within that 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter frame. Uh, Good idea to give the plants a shake before you start doing the counts, just in case there are any larvae still up on the plants, then you're knocking them to the ground. And just count everything within your 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter area, multiply by 4, and you've got a meter square count. The reason I suggest using a quarter of a meter square is a big area, and with Bertha armyworm, it's really important to monitor very thoroughly. Uh, During the day, they're good at hiding. They will get underneath any kind of debris on the surface. If there's curled up leaves, sometimes they crawl in the curled up leaves. So if you've got leaves in your quarter meter square, maybe unfurl a few of them and have a look inside. Even cracks in the soil they will sometimes get into. So it's a you're going to get better counts doing a quarter of a meter square and doing it thoroughly rather than trying to do a full meter square and doing it really quickly. And ideally, do about 5 areas in the field and get an average. It's possible you could stumble into a hot spot, and sometimes counts vary. So, minimum 5 areas. More is better as far as accuracy, but it takes time. So, aim for minimum 5 areas of the field. Now, once you've got your count, the next step is trying to decide, are we above any economic threshold? And we do have economic threshold tables for Bertha armyworm that can help you with this. I've pulled this directly from our fact sheet that's online. So this would be exactly what's on our fact sheet. In talking to growers over the past week, they've told me that most of them are in that $14 per bushel canola. So in the table, we would go over to 14, and then you scroll down to find what your expected spraying costs would be. Now, with a lot of the products people are using right now, we're probably looking at somewhere for an economic threshold, somewhere in the um, low 20s. So if you're able to get the spray and application cost on for $16 an acre, you'd be looking at about 19 for per meter square for your threshold. If it's 18, it's up to 22. But most people that I've run this scenario through with, it comes out somewhere in the low 20s. So that's usually what people are using for an economic threshold. This is based on research that's now a little bit on the older side, but it's the best we've got. And what they found was that for every Bertha armyworm feeding on the plants, you got about a 0.058 bushel per acre yield loss for each larva per meter square. So that's what you can expect. And based on that math, that's how we created these economic threshold tables. So do be scouting for them. As far as what can help take populations down for Bertha armyworm, a few things you might want to watch for while you're out scouting. There's a rather large parasitic wasp. It's called Bancus flavescens. It's an orange wasp, so it really stands out. They're not fast flyers, so when you do have a lot of them in the field, you do end up seeing them. And what they do is they like to lay their eggs on the early instar larva, which eventually will end up killing the Bertha armyworms. And there's also a very hairy fly called Athrysia cinerea, and they like to lay their eggs on the older larva. And when the larvae are containing the Athrysia parasitoids, the fly larva that is now living inside the Bertha armyworm makes a little breathing hole. So you can sometimes see this little white hole in the back of the Bertha armyworm, and you would know those have Athrysia. This year, though, what we seem to be seeing is both a fungal pathogen and a viral pathogen. A few people have commented that they were seeing dead Bertha armyworms at the top of the plants. Now, if you're dead Bertha armyworm looks like it's melting, if it turns a black color and it almost looks like it's melting at the top of the canopy, that'll be the virus. If your caterpillar has become somewhat limp and turned brown, it's possibly the fungal pathogen. So there have been some reports of pathogens in some of the fields being quite noticeable as well. Tricky part is you still have to make a threshold count based on the counts you do on the ground. And if your counts are still above threshold, even if you are seeing some of the pathogens, it may be economical to treat that field. And if you're looking for more information on Bertha armyworm, we do have a fact sheet on our website. It was updated this past April. I try to update this one annually because I have insecticide information in it, so it gets an annual update. So that's where you can find more information on scouting techniques, biology, color forms, thresholds, etc. And this is a little snippet from the fact sheet showing the currently registered insecticides. So you've really got your diamides, your coragen, Shenzi, then some pyrethroids, Desis, and its other versions, Matador Silencer, and the other versions of Lambda Cyhalothrin, Volium, and another pyrethroid called Upside or Ship. So this group here down below is all pyrethroids. Volium's got some coragen mixed in, and coragen. Those are your options. Coragen has the shortest pre-harvest, so a 1 day pre-harvest interval. So if you are starting to get close to harvest, but you still think you need to control, then something like a coragen max or a Shenzi might be a good option. So we'll move on to diamondback moth. I mentioned the higher populations seem to be more in the east and interlake right now. However, still good to be checking when you're out there looking for Bertha armyworm or other things when you're scouting your canola period. Good to be checking for both of these. On the right in the picture is the uh, larval stage. Now, the larvae don't get too big, 10, 12 millimeters. They're small green larvae. If you look really carefully, they do have what look like a forked tail to them. Their back set of prolegs are forked like this, so kind of looks like a fork at the back. One of the things that's very distinctive about them is if you disturb them, they will drop on a little silken thread, and then when they think they're safe, they will crawl back up again. So based on that behavior, you can distinguish them from other caterpillars as well. Again, very small green caterpillar. You shouldn't confuse this with Bertha armyworm, which is a bigger cutworm-like caterpillar. So diamondback, much smaller, quite distinctive. They do make these silky pupa cases. So if you start to see silken pupa cases on, it can be on the leaves, stem, even on the pods, that would be the diamondback moth pupa. Um, this is a young pupa in my picture here, so it's still quite white. You will see it darken as they get bigger, and eventually you will almost be able to see the adult moth right inside that silken case before they emerge. So right now we're probably into generation 2 or 3 with diamondback moth. The first two stayed pretty low, and all of a sudden we've just got some pockets where um, populations seem to be building. This is the adult stage, hence this is where they get the name diamondback moth from. A few white diamond or triangular patterns on the back of the adult moth. Now, scouting for diamondback moth is tricky. It used to be easier when canola was smaller, and what people used to do quite commonly was they would mark out a foot square area. So in this case, it's a smaller area, a foot square, and they would actually pull the plants in that foot square because it used to be easy to do and shake them out over something, whether it was a sheet or it could be a tray or whatever. Some people would take it back to their car hood and shake them out. That's tougher to do nowadays. The canola is a bit bigger, much more robust, and in a lot of fields, pulling a foot square of plants out just isn't going to happen. Um, so the best you can do in a case like that is give the plants still use the same technique, but instead of pulling plants and shaking them, you may be measuring out your foot square, grabbing the plants and giving them a shake. Either it can be into a white bucket over some sort of surface. I've heard of people using garbage can lids. I've got a piece of canvas on a frame that I like to use. It could be a tray or something you take out with you, but you need something you can shake the plants over. And what you're trying to do is shake the larva off the plants into your pail or your surface and get an idea for roughly how many larvae you have in that foot square. So because we're doing a foot square, you're going to be multiplying by 10 to get a meter square count. So in a foot square, if you can be shaking out very consistently 20 to 30 larvae in a foot square area, that's the point where you're probably getting into the economic threshold for diamondback moth. Also, keep an eye on what they're doing. This time of year, whether it's diamondback moth or Bertha armyworm, feeding to the leaves probably isn't doing a lot of damage to your yield. Um, once the leaves are once the pods are starting to get quite full, the leaf feeding will have less impact. It's the feeding directly to the pods which can be an issue. So whether it's Bertha or Diamondback, keep an eye on how much pod feeding could be occurring. If you are seeing what look like economic levels of diamondback moth and you are starting to see some pod feeding, that's when you might want to consider taking some actions. If you're not seeing a lot of pod feeding, I would say keep an eye on the field, see what happens with the populations, see if they're possibly transitioning to the pupa stage and you just let them play themselves out. Or if they start feeding on the pods, then you might need to treat. The other thing that could help you out for diamondback moth anyway is if you get a heavy pounding rain and there's a lot of young larvae. Sometimes a heavy pounding rain can knock them to the ground and end up killing a significant enough amount that you are now well below threshold. So if you do get a thunderstorm that rolls through, you get a pounding rain, that could help you out. The same amount of rain as a light drizzle all day probably won't do as much. It might, in the end, result in some pathogen activity, but I would keep an eye on it. And we also have a fact sheet on diamondback moth on our website. Same thing, it's got insecticide recommendations, which are actually a very similar group to what I showed you for Bertha armyworm. So if you need more information on scouting for diamondback moth, thresholds, management tips, insecticides, go to the fact sheet and all the information will be in there. So I'll just cover a couple more things just to be on the lookout for. And at the top of the list really is two-spotted spider mites. And this has been more of an issue in soybeans recently, but once again, more in the east and interlake regions. I haven't been getting reports of this from the western part of the province. Seems to be more of an eastern problem. Uh, Two-spotted spider mite does very well in hot, dry conditions. They don't do so well if we've had prolonged periods of rain and damp weather. There's a fungal pathogen that actually gets in the population, and the fungal pathogen is probably a bigger control factor than the physical pounding and washing off of mites from the rains, which can help as well if you get a heavy pounding rain. But if you get persistent, damp, rainy weather for a week or so, that can get the fungus going and take populations down. So after the recent rains, we'll have to reassess some of the fields and see what levels might be like. The vulnerable stages in soybeans are the R4 stage, your full pod stage, through the beginning seed stage where the seeds are filling. Now, once the seeds have filled and you get into R6, the full seed or what they call the green bean stage, where the seeds are now fully developed, they're going to start changing color. That's where spider mites become less of an issue. They'll still be feeding on the leaves. You will get leaves that are turning yellow and starting to cup, and it doesn't look pretty. But at that point, at R6, they're probably going to have less of an impact on yield. So it's the R4 and R5 stage that you really have to be careful and watch the spider mite activity. And grasshoppers. I guess the biggest question I've been getting actually is why aren't we seeing more grasshoppers? I know there have been some pockets and there's been a little bit of spraying in the province, but a lot of that's just been field edges. And I know there's been some spraying on pastures. There have been some pockets where they have been an issue. But overall, I think people were expecting a lot worse for grasshoppers this year. So the question I'm getting a lot is why aren't they worse? And we didn't have a very heavy population when we did our survey last year. However, we had really good egg laying conditions. And in my forecast, I mentioned to really be on the lookout for grasshoppers this year because we did get those good egg laying conditions last August and September. Good conditions meaning we didn't get a lot of rainy days, and it was August was normal for temperature. September was a lot warmer than normal. We had a very warm, relatively dry September. Our first frost didn't come until into October. We had really good egg laying conditions. And what makes our pest species is given the right conditions, they can lay a lot of eggs. There's lots of different species of grasshoppers in Manitoba. We've got roughly 85 species. There's four that we consider to be pests, and those four are species that can really build their populations up. Plus, they will feed on some of our plants. And just to do a little bit of grasshopper taxonomy with you here, the photo on the upper left, the one at the bottom of the photo with the two white stripes that go right from the back of the eye to the back of the wings, that's the two-striped grasshopper. One of our bigger of the pest species, uh, two two lines are a good giveaway to its identity. So two-striped grasshopper. The two above it with that are green with the black lines on the thorax, those are also two-striped grasshoppers. But these are older juveniles, older nymphs. And you can kind of see wing buds on them. So the wings on these two are not fully developed. They cannot fly yet. They their next stage will be to become an adult where their wings go to the back of the body and then they can fly. But the juveniles, they can just hop. So usually when the population is still in the juvenile stage, they're concentrated around field edges. Once they get their wings, they can disperse into fields a bit more. Right now, we're at the point where there's a lot of later juveniles and quite a few adults showing up in the population. So we've got a mixture of both. But as we proceed into August, it'll be more dominated by the adults for our pest species. And I've thrown another picture in with two of our other potential pest grasshoppers. The one on um, the left-hand side of the photo on the right is the clear-winged grasshopper. This one might look a little bit like a two-stripe to some people. They do have two white lines down the back. But they don't come right to the eye. They kind of start on the thorax, which might seem like a piddly difference. The other two things, though, that make this one easier to tell from two-striped, they are much smaller. So when you see it, you will recognize it's not one of the really big ones with the two white lines. They are quite a bit smaller, and they've got these chocolatey covered spots on their wings, which is tricky because we call it a clear-winged grasshopper, and it's got chocolatey spots on the wings. The clear wings are their flight wings, which are folded up underneath their forewings. So when they land and they close their wings, the forewings cover the clear hind wings, and the forewings have these chocolatey spots on the clear wing grasshopper. So maybe not the best descriptive name, but clear wing grasshopper is a grass specialist. So they like to feed in forage grasses, cereal crops. If you start to see them moving into a canola crop or a soybean crop, odds are they're just on the move, maybe moving in from a field edge or a pasture nearby or something. They usually don't feed on those crops. They will usually keep on moving, looking for a grassy crop to feed on. The other grasshopper on the right-hand side of this right-hand photo is the migratory grasshopper. They look like they've got a little black mask in behind their eye. Um, they're roughly the same size as clear winged. They're definitely smaller than two-striped grasshopper, and they'll have these sort of diagonal bands on their back legs as well. So that's how you can tell a migratory grasshopper. Those are the three most common grasshoppers that we have in Manitoba. I would say if I had to rank them, probably two-striped is our most common. Migratory number two, clearwing number three. The fourth pest species is called Packards. They have some blue legs, but we don't really see a lot of Packards. So if you know these three species, you'll know most of our crop pests. We do have a couple non-pest species that can be quite common, especially on field edges. Carolina grasshopper and meadow marshmallow grasshopper being two common ones, but they're non-pest species and they usually don't move into our crops. So in our crops, these would be the species you'd be seeing. Well, I'm going to go back to the grasshopper slide again. And I'll mention we are doing a grasshopper survey currently. So reminder for people who are involved in the survey, that needs to be done in August. What we're trying to do is estimate populations. We can't do exact counts when we're trying to figure out roughly how many per meter square are present in a ditch area or a field edge. What we do with our survey is we walk an area of about 50 meters, and at five different points, we estimate levels of grasshoppers in a meter square area, and then we figure out what the average is. Um, Farmers, agronomists, anybody who wants to can participate in this survey. So if you have some areas that you would like to assess and send me numbers, that would be awesome. Low numbers are as good as high numbers for the survey. So if there's areas that don't have a lot, that's good information as well. We're not trying to just map hotspots. We're trying to get an idea of what average populations are like within a region. So if there's anybody who would like to participate and send in a few counts, contact me, let me know. I would send you the protocol. It's easy enough to do, but you just have to get your head around the fact that you can't do accurate counts with grasshoppers. You're estimating rough levels when you're walking the ditches and things. If you need more information on products that could be used to control any of these insects, I refer you to our Guide to Crop Protection. This is updated annually, so this will have the product choices you need. And for the insecticides, what we do is for every commodity, we create something called an insect management chart. So I've pulled the page that has the information for Diamondback moth and Bertha armyworm. The way the management charts work is you find your insect, you then are given a list of registered products, and beside that, you will have rates, pre-harvest intervals, and whether you can do aerial or ground applications. So um, the insect management charts are a good tool that you can use to try to um, uh, uh, pinpoint the product that is best for your situation. In addition, I've mentioned we have a number of fact sheets on various crop feeding insects. I've just photographed the top of my list of fact sheets here. It's actually about three times this length. But for canola, we've got fact sheets on Bertha armyworm, cabbage magus, diamondback moth, flea beetles, etc. So if you go to our insect page on the Manitoba Agriculture website, you'll get a list of fact sheets. And if you click on any of those, that will take you to the fact sheet for that insect. And that will provide more information on scouting and thresholds and um, biology, management, etc. So maybe I'll end with that and be happy to take any questions if people have them.
Okay, good, John. Yeah, there's been some questions, and there'll be a couple questions in the crop scouting panel as well. But first one here is How do I count lygus bugs? Do I just count adults, or how much damage do the young instars do?
Yeah, super question. I'm going to give you a two-part answer. So for what you count, the adults and the older juveniles are what can do the economic damage. The young, their beak isn't as strong, so they have trouble piercing pods to feed on the juicy seeds inside. So you probably don't need to be worried about the really young ones, but as soon as you can see black spots on the back, that's when they're getting into their later juvenile stages. So you will count those later juveniles in the adults. If it's primarily really young nymphs and your canola is getting close to the seeds hardening, you may not have as big of an issue. So yeah, short answer is adults and later juveniles for what you count. Crop staging is a big factor as well. So Lygus bug, they like to feed on some of the newer growth. They like to feed on buds, flowers, and young seeds. When the seeds are still juicy, they can get their beak in and they like to feed on the juice inside. As the seed starts to harden, it becomes increasingly harder for them to feed. Um, when the seed is still kind of squishy, they can still get their beak in there and they can inject some enzymes that will dissolve an area and they will still feed. Once the seed becomes hard, though, if you can't squish the seeds in your finger, Lygus likely isn't feeding on them. So once the pods become a bit leathery and the seeds inside are hard, then Lygus aren't feeding on them anymore. So if most of your potting is at a stage where things are getting um, leathery, um, then you don't have to worry about them so much.
Okay, actually, maybe just a second part of that question, John. What about sunflowers? When do we need to start watching for them on sunflowers?
Sunflowers, it's the late bud stage and early flowering stage. That's the most critical stages to scout. And it's the same thing. They like to feed on the younger seeds. So what they will same feeding mechanism. They put their beak in, they inject some enzymes, they suck out the juice. The issue in sunflowers is the enzymes that they inject because those enzymes create a brown spot on the seed, which has a bitter taste. So if you've ever been eating some sunflower seeds and you get one that tastes really bitter, that could be because of Lygus bug. There's a couple other things that could cause those bitter seeds too. Lygus is one of them. That's why they're an issue. It's only a problem in sunflowers for human consumption. So if you're growing strictly oilseed sunflowers, not for human consumption, Lygus is not an issue. But if you're growing confection sunflowers, you need to avoid those bitter seeds. So late bud stage, early flowering stage is when you need to be scouting. And same principle, once the seeds have firmed up, hardened up a bit, they become less enticing, and Lygus would not be feeding on them.
Okay, great, John. We're gonna get Aaron to move my slides here. So, Aaron, if you can go to the and maybe just go one more. Okay, John. While I still got you on with the crop scouting panel, I got this sent to me last week. It was a canola field, and if you can maybe explain what was going on there.
Okay, I had a brief look at it. Line on my screen went wonky on me here, but it looked like the picture on the left was a root with a maggot in it. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that is cabbage maggot. It's not uncommon to uh, see them in canola when you're pulling roots. If you pull a root and you've got one maggot, but you have to look hard to see the tunneling, that's not an issue. Where it becomes an issue is when you have multiple maggots in a root and you have very extensive tunneling. There really isn't an economic threshold. It's a really hard thing to assess because assessing means pulling roots and looking at the amount of tunneling. There's a 0 to 5 scale that was developed for assessing these roots, and so once you get into the mid range, the 3 to 4 on the scale, that's when it's economical. But the tricky part is there's nothing much you can do. There's nothing you can spray for root maggots. There's no seed treatment that really works on them. So there's not much you can really do. With your pulling roots, looking for clubroot and other things, and you're noticing a lot of tunneling, it is something interesting to take note of. But as mentioned, unless you're seeing very extensive tunneling, it's probably not something that's going to be economical. We have had years, though, where there's been tunneling that was extensive enough that in dry conditions you would notice some plants looking a little bit wilty. So there are situations where it could get economical. Um, but again, that is usually where you've got very extensive tunneling in the roots.
Okay. I don't know. Can you still see your screen, John? Or are you?
I'm back to my
You are.
discussion and questions slide. I
Okay.
might pop over to Marla's office. Give me 1 sec here, and I'll be back to a screen that actually can show this.
Okay. Aaron, if I can get you to flip screens here. Maybe what we can do is, I don't know, John, are you there? Aaron, flip one more screen. Okay. We're looking at pre-harvest time, and I guess this question would be for Anne, and maybe just time for
Yeah,
pre-harvest
I was
and
losing
what we
pictures.
should be
So
looking
if you
for.
want, I can talk about those caterpillars.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
so
John.
you've got a couple different, well, you got 3 different caterpillars. So the first one on the left is what we call a salt marsh caterpillar. They belong to a really cool group of moths called the tiger moths. Um, they call them salt marsh because of where they were first found in North America, around the salt marshes in New England. But they don't really have this association with marshes. They've got lots of different plants they will feed on. We generally don't consider them a crop pest, though. Normally, when you do see them in, say, a canola crop, you will see them in other crops as well. It's usually an edge effect. Being a really big, hairy caterpillar, they really stand out. Um, so, yeah, they're quite noticeable. If anyone thinks they have an economic population, I'd love to hear about it and maybe come and see it. But normally it's just an edge effect of a few caterpillars, but because they're so showy, it really stands out. Middle picture, that was the diamondback moth cocoon that I showed earlier. It's a bit more mature cocoon than the one I showed, which was more white inside. So this one, the moth is developing inside that silky cocoon. So probably you'd have a moth popping out of that within a couple of days. And the caterpillar on the right is another really cool tiger moth caterpillar. This one we call the yellow bear. It's a type of woolly bear. This one's called yellow bear, although its colors can vary somewhat. Sometimes they're really yellow, and other times um, almost more white. But same as salt marsh caterpillar, they're very visible, not considered an economic pest. There'll be something that you will certainly notice if you've got a few of them um, feeding at the top of the plant. But usually, again, it's just a few near a field edge, um, not a situation that would be economical. And you will see yellow bear caterpillars in lots of crops, canola, soybeans, many broadleaf crops.
Okay. The only other part of that one is the curling of some of the pods. Usually get a question every year about that, where what's causing that.
Yeah, so I didn't look down low enough there. Yes. Um, So in this case, what's happened? There was a group of really tiny insects called thrips, just a few millimeters long. They often don't get noticed because they're so small. What thrips like to feed on flowers, so they're often attracted in when the canola is flowering. They will often move out shortly after the canola flowers, but Sometimes there'll be enough of them around that when the pods are really young, they will feed often on the upper surface of the pod. And you often have very unequal feeding between upper and lower surfaces. And what that does is kind of messed up the hormonal balance of that pod. And the way the pod grows, they will grow in this curled fashion that almost looks like a curly fry. So that's from thrips. This has been studied. It's very noticeable. And Ag Canada in Saskatoon, when Onofrit was around, he did a study looking at could this be economical, and his conclusion was not likely. Even in some of the fields where it was the most noticeable, they weren't detecting economic losses from it. So it's very visible, but in most cases, not likely highly economical.
Okay, good. Thanks, John. Next slide there, Aaron. Okay, now we'll go to Anne, and we're going to talk a little bit about staging your crop for pre-harvest and some of the kind of hints or pointers she has for us to check on that.
Sure. So for wheat and barley, pre-harvest glyphosate should be applied when the grain moisture content is less than 30%. So that's hard dough stage. So the easiest way, and this is the picture that Lionel has up here, is with the thumbnail test. So if the kernel's at the hard dough stage, it will be firm, and a thumbnail impression remains on the kernel when you press into it. So when it's at the soft dough stage, when you press your thumbnail into the kernel, you won't see that mark for very long. It'll pop back out. But once it's at the hard dough stage, that kernel, either you won't be able to make a mark because the kernel will be too hard, or that thumbnail mark will stay in the kernel. So at the end of the hard dough stage, those kernels have reached their maximum dry weight. And this this applies to all cereal types. So that hard dough stage kernel or thumbnail test. So the recommendation is to wait for the entire field to be at that proper stage before pre-harvest glyphosate is applied, just to make sure we're in line with those MRLs and those guidelines.
Okay, and next slide, Aaron. Well, actually, yeah, okay, we'll go to this one. Okay, so Kim, there's been a lot of talk, and a lot of producers are wondering, did my chemical work very good, or how good did it work? Because we're seeing a lot of weeds starting to pop up on the fields right now, and we're seeing them getting above crop, and it's not just in canola fields. We're seeing it in wheat fields. We're seeing it in barley fields, and just wondering, I guess, some advice as to how we can get into harvest and how long it might take for some of these weeds to dry down.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Yeah, it was not the greatest of years for weed control. We are seeing lots of escapes. There's lots of reasons. This year it was, I think, quite difficult in the spring. We were fairly cool and dry sometimes, and then we did have some really hot days, and weeds were maybe hardened off a bit because of the weather conditions, or they might have been just maybe not quite at the right stage when we were able to get there and do and get the spraying done. And then, for a lot of us, we had those flushes, those rains came after spraying, especially in a cereal crop. You got one shot usually, and that's it. With canola, usually you can go twice if you planned on that, and hopefully you can. You don't always end up doing that, but you at least could go a second time with corn and soybeans as well. You usually have that second app that you can go back in with if you want. And so, but with cereals, especially, if the weeds come after you've sprayed, then realistically, you're not going to get them. So we are seeing a lot of broadleaf weeds, especially poking up above the crop. Starting to see some barnyard grass poking up too. Some of them are warm season weeds, so the pigweeds and things and barnyard grass and that. So those probably came after spraying because they take a little bit longer to get going in the spring. And some of them are things like lamb's quarters. We've got some kochia, again, some pigweeds and things like that sticking up above the crop. And we just may have missed those with our in-crop spraying. So there's multiple things you can do right now. Like if you're talking, true desiccation, that's, using a product like Reglone, where you're waiting till that crop is, pretty much just ready to be harvested, very, very close to harvest pre-harvest anyways. You need to be at kind of 90% or more dry down anyways. And that's just going to come in and desiccate those green weeds and get those dried out so you can get the combine through. If you're talking, pre-harvest weed control, then you're talking about glyphosate or probably glyphosate plus heat or saflufenicil added in. That's actually going to take longer. But if you're going after annual weeds, that's maybe not the best idea unless you really think you're going to stop those annual weeds from setting seed. But if you do have any perennial weeds in those crops, then obviously the pre-harvest glyphosate is great. But adding that heat in, especially if you have any kochia around, because we know we have an awful lot of, or most of our kochia in the province is glyphosate resistant. And so, those products that we deal with. And so depending on what your goal is, are you going after like just a quick dry down? Are you going after, are you trying to get some of these weeds, do some more weed control rather than just the desiccation? And then there are a few crops that actually glufosinate. Some brands of glufosinate are registered for pre-harvest as well, but only on some crops. So you have to be really careful with that. It's not registered on all crops, and it's certainly not all brand names as well. So check your current guide to crop protection on that. But on some canola, there are a couple of brands registered, and then other crops as well, things like alfalfa for seed and lentils and potatoes. There's a few more brand names registered. So there's a limited amount of glufosinate that could be applied as well. So again, check your guide to crop protection on that. But again, knowing what weeds are there, what the target is, and the timeline. Obviously, glyphosate's going to take the longest. You're talking, 10 days to 2 weeks could be, depending on the weather, even longer depending on the weather if we've got lots of rainy periods coming up. Whereas, when you're desiccating with something like a Reglone, that's a true desiccant, you're usually in that crop in, 3 to 5 to 7 days, you're in that crop. So you need to be able to be harvesting that crop very quickly and be ready to go on that crop because it's much, much faster. And then adding, if you're doing Roundup and heat or glyphosate and heat together, you're kind of in the middle between those two.
Okay, and I've talked to some producers, and they were wondering about adding, something else to the glyphosate, say, you know, um, a broadleaf product. I talked to some guys, and they were going, "What if I added some 2,4-D and went after these spots?" Is that something that you've seen before or recommended, or is it even the pre-harvest interval long enough?
Yeah, there's nothing that would be registered for pre-harvest, and that's exactly because of that pre-harvest interval. And again, a lot of these weeds are so big by now anyways, I'm not sure that that's going to work well. Realistically, if they're annual weeds and some annual weeds will regrow after harvest, then you may have better luck going after some of those annual weeds after harvest, and they regrow, and you can get them with a fall application, of which there are several. There's lots of products we can use in the fall and some good broadleaf products we can use there too. But to add something like that in as a pre-harvest, there's nothing registered, and that is just not a good idea. And especially because of that pre-harvest interval, there's nothing registered, and you would not want to be compromising that pre-harvest interval by adding something in that shouldn't be there.
Good point. Thanks, Kim. Okay, Aaron, next slide. Okay, this one would be for Anne again, and basically, question came in regarding fusarium, and the producer sprayed for fusarium, but he said he's still seeing some in the field. We've been getting lots of rain and really humid and moist conditions over the last little while, and he was wondering if once that infection is in the head, can it spread to the other kernels now that it's there?
Yeah, so for the disease surveys, we have just wrapped up the fusarium head blight surveys, and in general, we found very low levels of disease. So in talking to a few of the surveyors and the fields that I surveyed, most of the fields we couldn't find any FHB heads just as part of the survey, or even just kind of looking around. I've been out doing some collection in untreated strips in fields as part of the fusarium head blight risk map project, and there I could find some fusarium, but definitely very low levels of fusarium even in unsprayed areas. The answer for fusarium spreading through the head is yes, that it can. So once those infected spikelets, like you can see the infected spikelet in the picture, the disease spreads upwards and downwards by sequentially infecting those spikelets above and below. So if conditions remain warm and moist after seed set, the pathogen can continue to spread to other kernels or heads. The issue that we typically see later in the season is producing higher levels of mycotoxins. So you might not see as many like fusarium damaged kernels, but the risk of having higher levels of DON is there. I can't, just because it would be a really difficult thing to study, I wasn't able to find any information on, what we would actually expect for levels of DON or increasing fusarium with those, later spreading infections, but just to know that, yes, that definitely is a risk and can happen.
Okay, so even though his question was, well, when the initial infection happens is when the glooms are open, and now they should be closed. He said he was wondering if they could still infect it even at that point.
Yes, yeah. So you'll see it move up to those glooms for sure. Um, so yeah, it can continue to infect it and just by spreading because you can see those spores being produced on those glooms. So like those FHB spores, the little pink ones, with more moist conditions, those spores will spread throughout the spike. But like I said, it's really tricky to know if you're like assessing FHB to know what percent of that infection or how much of that dawn was produced at the time of like at flowering time and how much was produced later. So I really don't have a good estimate of like what you would actually expect for increasing numbers. So I would, in many cases, I would expect that it's not contributing a huge amount to the amount of dawn or fusarium, but it is a risk. And we do know that with later infections, like earlier infections, we do tend to see more fusarium damaged kernels, and those later infections, the bigger risk is higher levels of dawn.
Okay,
So you might
and
not see those kernels having those fusarium, like those FDKs, the fusarium damaged kernels might not be as evident, but you could still have more levels of dawn in that grain.
okay, good. We had a picture sent in, and I don't have it on the slide, but it was a picture sent where it was a fall rye field, and there was three heads on one plant, like one stem. There was three heads, and there was probably three or four different places in the field where I guess they seen this, and they sent it in. They were wondering what might have caused that. So I was wondering, I don't know, Anne or Kim, did you guys get the pictures?
I didn't see, I saw the email, but I guess, yeah, I forgot to open the picture. I have not seen that, but I did just do like thinking a little bit about that in a quick search. Kim will have an answer with the herbicide issue, but I think there is a chance that that could happen just with environmental stress as well, that the plant is stressed due to, dry conditions, cool, whatever the kind of environmental stress might be, could potentially cause that. One thing that I did see in one field doing fusarium head blight surveys, and this is on wheat that I've never seen before, is like multiple spikelets. So like instead of just having, your one row of spikelets, there was many plants in this field where there was like three spikelets, kind of just the one spikelet against the stem and then two more extending outwards, like all coming from the same point. So I was wondering if that was like an environmental stress response as well, but I haven't seen that before either before this year as well. I'm not sure if Kim has comments about potential for herbicide issue.
Yeah, I don't know. Usually, like maybe like we can sometimes, especially with the group fours, because those are auxin mimics and they can make the plants grow and do weird things. Normally we can see deformed or kinked heads, and sometimes we see with some late applications of some products, we see heads emerging from the boot funny, and the awns get caught and they get all kinky and bent over and weird looking. I've never seen where you'll get multiple heads. I guess it is possible, but I'm not sure that we could pinpoint that back. I haven't seen that specifically where that's been noted from a specific application, but I guess it is possible. But there also can be some weird environmental things go on too. If it's not too much, if there's not too many plants like that in the field, then if it was a herbicide application had done it, you'd expect to see probably more in the field, and maybe some pattern to it as well. But again, I guess we'd have to take a look at that whole field to see how much of that there was.
Okay, and maybe we got a new hybrid strain of rye, so one the plant produced three heads, so might be
Yeah, I just
something.
looked at those pictures and they're pretty interesting to see that that response.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll do some more thinking about it, and if we have something else, we'll bring it back next week. Aaron, could I get you to keep going with the slides and we'll go to another one to where I'll tell you when to stop here. Okay, stop there. Okay, back one. Okay, so to try to save some time here, I want to just talk about a few days that are going to be coming up. We have the canola disease training and variety value trials tour. There's going to be 5 different locations throughout the province coming up, and there's the locations and dates are there. Going to be staff out in the field, a combination of the Canola Council. Sonia Wilson's going to be out there. She'll be from Manitoba Ag. And there'll be also the Crop Alliance will be out there as well. So there'll be an infield kind of day where you'll be able to ask questions, look at some of the stuff we're looking at when we go and do our disease surveys and identifications, and just be able to go through some canola issues that are out in the field. It's that time of year where it'll be a good time to be able to look at identification factors. So mark the dates down if you want to attend, and there will be CCA credits. So this is the corn or the canola disease training. If you want to go to the next slide, there'll be a special crops disease training as well, and this one will be looking at at uh, flax, and we'll be looking at sunflowers, and we'll be looking at corn. And again, these will be only 4 days here. And again, the locations, these ones will be happening in September, so just a little farther and it'll be again, an opportunity to meet with staff and go through some of the disease identifying issues that are out there, and just kind of give you the ability to go through and make sure you're seeing some of the stuff that we're seeing when we're out in the field. So mark those dates down as well. Next slide. Go right through to the last slide. I think we're good there. Right there is perfect. So I'd like to apologize for some of the issues we had today. I wasn't able to use my screen, so thanks, Aaron, for picking that up and being able to do this. And hopefully we don't have as many problems next week, but join us on the next edition of Crop Talk, August 20th. And we'll be probably talking about some harvest yields and some quality and those type of things. So if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of myself or Lori, and we'll see you next week.